Now, we are all going to become frogs. Just do what I do. Ready? Everybody use this hand shape. Now down, and now jump. Then these are the frog's vocal sacs. And then the eyes. There's a bug. What do you do with a bug if you're a frog? And then burp. Did the audience burp? Let's do it again. Ready? Awesome. A long, long time ago, deep in a thick forest, moss-filled, lived a king, a very powerful king, and that king had 3 sons. One day, he beckoned his 3 sons. Father, my sons, today is a special day for you. Today, you're going to become men. Now go find a wife. But, Father, how? No worries. See this silver arrow? What you're going to do is you're going to take it and shoot it anywhere you want. And the first woman to touch the arrow will become your wife. Okay, so the first son grabbed the arrow, drew it back, and threw it way up into the sky, through the clouds, and back down to the earth, into the royal garden. And sitting next to it was this beautiful woman. And she looked and saw the arrow, and she grabbed it, and she was like, this is such a beautiful arrow. And then the first son came on horseback. He had a mustache. He jumped off the horse. Will you marry me? Yes. Dating service is so much easier back then. Then the second son drew the arrow back, shot it into the air, through the clouds, back down to the earth, into another royal garden. And there was a beautiful woman there picking flowers. She saw the arrow. She said, oh my goodness, it is such a big arrow. Wow. And then off in the distance came not a prince sitting on a horse, but standing on a horse. He hopped off the horse, went up to the woman and said, will you marry me? And she said, yes. And then the third son, his name was Ivan. He grabbed the arrow, pulled it back as hard as he could, and he didn't shoot it up. He shot it straight through the forest, and it ricocheted off a bunch of trees, and then it landed in a bog. The father said, well, you shot it. You got to go retrieve it. Go get it. So he said, all right. So he walked into the woods, and it started getting wet. He was getting wet. There was tons of mosquitoes. And it got darker and darker and colder, and he couldn't find the arrow. And so he started crying. And all of a sudden he heard a voice that said, my prince, why are you crying? He said, what? Who said that? Me. Who's me? Down here. And so he looked down, and lo and behold, there was a frog sitting there. Oh, hello there. Prince, what are you looking for? Well, I'm looking for my arrow. I lost it and I don't know where it went. And the frog said, do you mean this arrow? And stuck his tongue out, and there was an arrow on the frog's tongue. And then he swallowed it back up. He's like, yeah, that's it. Let me grab it. Wait a minute. Now, is it true that any woman who touches the arrow must become your wife? Yeah, as a matter of fact, that is true. Okay, so he picked up the frog and he took off back to his father's house. His father was on the throne, and the first son came up to him and said, I'd like to introduce you to my fiancée. The second son approached his father and said, this is my future wife. And then Ivan came up. I'd like to introduce you to my wife, Ribbit. Well, I am the king, and my word is law, so he's going to have to marry that frog. Now, the future wives, the king said, go home. I want you to weave the best blanket you can. Be gone. So Ivan got home, and he started pacing. And the frog was looking at him and said, what's wrong? Why are you worried, Ivan? And he said, my father wants all of our wives to sew the best blanket for the wedding, but you're a frog. What am I going to do? And the frog said, don't worry. Go rest. Go sleep. And so he took off. And then the frog, seeing him leave, took off the frog skin to reveal a blonde, green-eyed, with a white dress, beautiful woman. She opened the front door and she called out to all the forest animals, and they came in. The rabbit, the raccoon, the mouse, the deer, and they brought the best materials from all over the forest, and they spent their time weaving until they perfected the blanket. It had a picture of an eagle right in the center. And then she sent them all away. And then she donned her frog suit on again and waited. The next morning, Ivan woke up, stepped out, and he saw the blanket. He said, oh, this is beautiful. So he took it to his father's house. The king sat on his throne and said, let me see what you have. And the first wife came up and handed him a blanket, and he said, not too shabby. The second came up and said, here you go. And he grabbed it, and it immediately fell apart. He said, yeah, that's not going to work. And then Ivan showed up, and he said, this is for my fiancée. The minute the king touched the blanket, he imagined himself a baby and thought, wow, this is what we're going to use for the wedding night. The rest of the blankets go to the kitchen to wash dishes. And then he said to his sons, tomorrow night, we're going to have a ball. Have your fiancés make a cake and bring it for the ball. So Ivan once again got home and started pacing. And then the frog was watching him pace back and forth, and she said, what's wrong? What are you worried about? What's happening? And Ivan said, well, my father wants all the fiancés to make a cake. But you're a frog. What am I going to do? And the frog said, don't worry. Go rest, go to sleep, and it'll be taken care of. And he said, okay. So he took off, went to the room, closed the door, fell asleep, and once again, she took off the frog suit to reveal her true self, opened the door, had all these animals that brought the best food from the forest in, and they started mixing it, adding ingredients, pouring it into a pan, and made a beautiful cake. And then they went their own way. Once again, she donned her frog suit on and sat there. The next morning, Ivan woke up, stepped out, and saw the cake. He was like, yes! He grabbed the cake, took off to go see his father. His father said to the first son, bring it here, let me see. And he took off the cover, and immediately the cake did this. Yeah, that's not going to work. Next, the second wife came, revealed the cake, and the cake did this. Yeah, that won't work either. Go on. And then Ivan showed up with his cake from his wife. And he opened it up and revealed a beautiful 3-layer cake with ribbons on it, had tiny little mice playing music sitting on it, had little birds singing on the top. And the king said, this is the cake for the banquet, or for the ball. And then he instructed them to dress nicely and bring their fiancés for the ball. And again, Ivan got home and started pacing. And the frog once again looked at him and said, oh, here we go again. Ivan, what's wrong? What is happening? Well, my father wants us to get dressed to the nines, but you're a frog. What am I going to do? And the frog said, you know what? Don't worry. Go on to the ball now. And when you see rain outside, it means I'm bathing. When you hear or feel the thunder, it means I'm changing my clothes. And if you see lightning, that means I've arrived. Awesome. So he took off. He got to his father's house. There was a long table, golden cups of wine, beautiful chandeliers, all the food spread out. The king sat down. The first son was there with his wife, the second son, and then Ivan, where's the frog, son? Oh, well, and then at that moment, he saw it start to rain outside. And he said, oh, she's bathing. She's taking a bath. Oh, okay, son. And then he felt the thunder. So Ivan jumped up and said, hey, she's getting dressed. She's combing her hair. She's getting ready. Okay, son. And then all of a sudden, there was a bolt of lightning. And then the back door opened, and a gust of wind came in. And Ivan stood up, and he said, my wife is here. And he went to the front, and there was 6 white horses. Drawing a carriage. The carriage doors opened, and Ivan ran up, opened the door, and expecting a frog, he went down. But then he saw legs. And then a hand reached out to grab his. There was this beautiful green dress, beautiful blonde hair, green eyes. Hi, Ivan. The king sat there. The sons did this. And then there was a fly that went into the son's mouth, and the fly was doing this. And so he got the chair, pulled it out. No, I'll pull it out. I'll pull it out. The king said, stop, Ivan. So he pulled out the chair. His wife sat down. They sat down. The first and second wife were looking and said, look, she's a little bit odd. Look what she's doing. And what she was doing was taking bites of food and then taking another bite and sticking it in her sleeve. And she kept doing this. They're like, that's so odd, but let's do what she's doing. So they stuck food in their sleeves as they ate. And then the king said, let's dance. My first son, let's see you dance. And the son reached out to the wife. And she said, oh, no, I couldn't. No. Okay, what about the second son? And she was like, no, I have a headache. No, not today. And so then he looked out to Ivan and he said, Ivan, me? And the frog said, I would dance if you'd like. And so he grabbed her and he looked her in the eyes and he said, I don't know how to dance. And she just smiled back and she said, don't worry. All of a sudden they levitated off the ground. And they started dancing in the air. The food that she put in her sleeve started shooting out. There was a sea of fish that swam out, and mountains grew, trees came up, fruit fell off the trees, a rainbow shined down on them dancing. The second and first wife looked at each other and said, let's do it. So they grabbed their husbands, went out there, and started dancing with them. And the food that they stuck out didn't shoot out water. It was blood, it was snot, bones were shooting out, but they kept trying. And the king said, stop. Lady, please have a seat. I want to have a chat with you. Ivan, he didn't make that connection between the woman who was there and the frog. And so he thought his frog wife was somewhere else. So as the king was talking to the woman, he went back to the house and looked for his wife. And on the ground, he noticed the skin of the frog laying on the floor. He picked it up and he said, oh, it's her. It is really her. And he said, you know what? She doesn't have to hide it anymore. So he opened up the firewood stove and he threw the skin in there and burnt it up. And then she arrived. She opened the door. And I even said, you're looking for the skin, aren't you? She said, yes, I am. Do you have it? He said, you know what? You don't need it anymore. I threw it in the fire. And her face did this. No, you shouldn't have. I needed it. I can't be with you anymore. But I will always love you. And then she disappeared. Ivan realized something in that moment. That what women want the most in the world is not jewelry, earrings. It's not music or a romance. What women want most in the world is the freedom to make their own decisions. And if you take that from someone you love the most, it is the meanest thing you could do to that person. Ivan realized that, fell to his knees, looked at the ashes, and then started rubbing the ashes all over himself. And then his back started shrinking, and he kept rubbing it. His hands became webbed, and he fell to the ground. His eyes got big. And Ivan became a frog. Ivan took off back to that same bog, and he stayed there. And then, one day, as he was sitting near the water, he noticed a golden ball. It fell into the water, and he looked at it. And then he saw a young woman, and she was crying. And he looked to her and he said, "My princess, why are you crying?" But that's a story for another day. It seems I have about 3 minutes left. So I'm going to tell you a 3-minute story about another king. So there was this king who had 4 daughters. And he beckoned them. And he said, "I have a gift for you 4." He reached in and he handed the first one a sunflower seed. And the first daughter went up, curtsied, and said, "A seed? So she put it in a little golden box and stored it away. The second daughter came up, grabbed the seed, and was like, "Okay, I'll just throw it in my delicate drawer." And then the third daughter came up and was like, "I don't know," just threw it over her shoulder and it fell in the wood floor. The fourth daughter grabbed the seed and thought about it. Years and years went by. The king's health deteriorated, and he called his daughters once again. "My dear, precious children, I'm going to be leaving you soon." And they said, "No, no, no." He said, "No, no, no. Remember those seeds I gave you long, long ago? Please bring them back." The first daughter was like, "Ooh, I put it in the little box. I know where it's at." So she handed him the seed, and he looked at it and he said, "Great." The second daughter was like, "Ooh, I put it in the drawer where her bra and underwear were." Like, "Here it is." Nice. The third daughter was like, "Oh no, I threw it on the floor." So she looked and searched. She found it, dusted it off. Obviously a mouse had gotten to it and said, "Here it is, Dad." And then the fourth daughter approached him and said, "Father, I can't give you the seed." "Why, dear? Let me show you." And so she helped her frail father up to the window, opened up the window, and outside there was a sea of yellow sunflowers. The father looked out impressed and he said, "You are going to be the queen from now on." The point of the story is that you're here this weekend and you're going to be hearing so many stories. What are you going to do with those stories? It's up to you. You can put it into a little golden box, or put it into your cabinet drawer, or throw it over the shoulder. But what you really want to do is share the story and spread it out. Thank you.